This week, our discussion is on the integration of theology and psychology. And this is a very complex topic. You actually have an individual course and pieces of other courses that hit in our counseling program on integration. And so this week for us in the theories class, we're kind of hitting the high points of the idea of integration. But this is a really important topic to consider as Christians. For those of us who are conservative, Bible believing, faith producing, growing Christians, um, doing counseling and considering these theories from that perspective or from a Christian worldview can often be a very difficult and trying kind of process. Some teach, like Jay Adams and those who follow what was originally called nouthetic counseling, which is now usually considered or referred to as biblical counseling, believe that you can't even do this, that integration itself or any way of trying to take what is secular and the theories of secular counseling and integrate them into the Christian worldview and then try to counsel people from that really was impossible and wrong and antithetical to the scriptures. And folks even said that Christians who, as they put it, imbibe in that are not even being faithful to the scriptures. Others say that we can be counselors and we can practice secular psychology, and those modes of work and processing are really two different things. That's one of the ideas in the book of Johnson's book, The Five Views, that they're really this levels of explanation model. And so when we're talking about different things like theology, its level and its consideration is different from that of psychology. And so you can actually do those things differently. Other people believe that we can borrow from secular psychology and the ideas of secular psychology and somehow or another roll and mesh those with Christian theology and a Christian worldview and do so adequately. Some people believe that Christian psychology or Christian counseling really is something completely, and I guess probably theoretically, something that stands on its own and is something very different. And so as we kind of think through this week, we're going to look at those things. Now, here's the reality. For this course and what we're doing and the material that we're covering, the intent is not to give you a surefire idea of how you're going to do this, because it's just not the nature of this course and we don't have the time to cover it. But it is important to think about this. And throughout the curriculum at B.H. Carroll, you will be encouraged and challenged to deal with this dilemma that we face as Christians who are working in the counseling field. And so we have to think about this and what it means for us. And this may not be something that you just kind of nail down and say, oh, this is what I believe and do. Over the course of your career, this is likely something that will, just like a theory for you, will develop and challenge you. And you will grow as you think these things through. But for this week, this is going to be kind of our topic and our idea that we have to hit on. Now, there is an idea that I have presented to you from a paper that I wrote on integration as part of my studies at B.H. Carroll that concluded three things. And some of these things were kind of borrowed that you'll see from Tan in our textbook or in an article that he wrote about integration. But I came to the conclusion of this, that anything that we do in terms of integration must meet three criteria. And if any of these three criteria are not met, then we're going to have a difficulty integrating any theory into a Christian worldview or a Christian mindset. And that is that somehow or another it has to be biblically based, meaning that it somehow or another you can mesh it, the ideas of that theory, with the Bible. It has to be theologically true, meaning that the underlying tenets or the underlying ideas of that theory don't stand in opposition to Christian theology. And then finally, whatever it is that is being done is God glorifying. Now, those are the three criteria. Now, the reality is if you look at every one of these secular ideas in our textbook and you try to play them out with those three things, somewhere or another, all of them are going to fail that test on one of those levels, some on all of them. And when that happens, I think we have to be very particular in how we use the ideas of that theory or we try to adopt it. Other theories are more likely to be more easily adopted. For example, one of the big topics that everybody uses today, we've already talked about, is cognitive behavioral therapy. And if you just look at CBT on its basic level, it deals with thinking and it deals with behavior. Those are the two things. And there are some integrated processes of emotion and sensation that go into that. Well, when you think about CBT and its use and the fact that it is so heavily preferred today, and you play it through that, well, does the Bible talk about behavior and thinking? Of course it does. It absolutely does. Are the basic tenets of how we think and how we act, do those things go against any theological tenets? Well, not really, because we think about how we think, what we think. The Bible says, as a person thinketh, so is that person. The Bible actually talks about, even though it doesn't use these terms, stinking thinking, warped thinking, bad kinds of decision making, bad behaviors, and the processes of engaging in those bad behaviors. Psalm 1 talks about walking and sitting, or walking and standing and then sitting in the seats of the scoffers. That's a process of actions on the part of a person that can lead to demise. Seems to me those things potentially could work very well and integrate very well with our Christian worldview. And so basically, if you kind of work through CBT in that realm, you could probably align something like CBT, and it would fit with those criteria, those three criteria that I've laid out to you. Others may not. Sigmund Freud, in psychoanalysis, he was hostile to religion, just straight out, and said, religion is basically a crutch that human beings have created to help themselves. Alfred Adler, while he never really embraced the Christian faith, he and his children were baptized more for the logistics of what they needed to do to work. At that time, it was very difficult for Jews to get work in certain places. And so for them to have been baptized was more of an act of just needfulness, I guess you would say, to be able to function in the world than it was because they were believers in Jesus Christ. Now, Adler wrote a lot about spirituality. He wrote a lot about religion, and he certainly was not hostile to it. Some others have been very supportive of religious beliefs, even though they weren't particularly Christian or written from a Christian worldview. And so there are places that we can find points to integrate. And so this week, as you think about this, think about what we are studying and the theories that we're studying. Our textbook is written in such a way that each of the theories kind of has a biblical comparison or a biblical, or is considered from a biblical standpoint in how it meshes with Scripture or not. And so there is a critique written by Tan about each of the theories and kind of their religious or biblical standing and those problems where it could mesh or it may not mesh as well with the Christian faith. So I want you to think about this week. And maybe begin as you're thinking about this to apply some standard as you're going through these theories this semester, is to not just think about what is the theory about, what are the techniques, what are the interventions, what are the underlying foundational pieces of that theory, but also how do these things mesh with Christian theology, with a Christian worldview? Because the reality is most of the time they don't very well. And so we have to be very careful with those things. Doesn't mean we can't use them, doesn't mean we can't incorporate them in some way or another. It just means that I think we have to be very careful in our efforts to do that. And we have to do it, I think, with a very sobering mind, as we've talked about, and in a very responsible way. Um, we also run into, and this kind of relates to last week's discussion on ethics, but for example, if you are working in a secular setting or as a professional, you are licensed, and I know most of the people in this class want to be licensed. Licensing standards, ethical standards that are written from a secular standpoint, quite often undermine the theological tenets of the Christian faith. In fact, one of the things that's been very controversial is, what if a person who is a practicing homosexual comes to you, and because of, if you have a Christian belief that that is wrong or that is sinful, then how do you deal with that person? Because according to the secular standards of ethics, you can't enforce or you can't impose your values on that person. And you have to work with them. You cannot refer them to somebody just simply on the basis that you don't accept their values and beliefs. According to the American Counseling Association Code of Ethics, that would be unethical, unless there were some other aspect that would cause you not to be able to work with that person out of competency. That's different. But if you just simply refer that person out or say, I can't work with you because I have a difference in values and beliefs, the ACA, the American Counseling Association, says that's unethical. So as we go through this and as we lean even on our Christian worldview, but also try to create a space for ourselves in the world where we are applying a Christian worldview in a counseling way, we have a lot of issues and a lot of dilemmas that we're going to face. Again, we don't have time to figure them all out in this course, but this week as we go through this and talking about integration, these are the kinds of things that will be faced by Christian counselors who uphold a Christian worldview. Now, if you're in a Christian setting counseling and you're applying the ideals of the Christian faith and Christian worldview, and people are coming to you looking for that and know that, then that's a great opportunity to just hold to those ideals and utilize them. The reality is a lot of people will not end up in that kind of setting. They may end up like I am in a school setting, in a secular school setting. I've worked for the South Carolina Department of Mental Health, which is a governmental agency. I've worked in other settings where to have those values or to express them openly can be problematic at times. And so sometimes you have to deal with that, and how do you make sense out of that? And there's no easy way to do that, and there's no particular roadmap that I can give you for doing that. It's something that we have to come together with God and where God leads us and takes us, and then what we do. And so we'll talk about that this week. I hope you're doing well this week. This is our third week. We're about to hit the midpoint next week. I know that seems crazy when you think about that, but next week will be our midway point in this course. And so, again, as always, reach out if you have questions or thoughts about anything. Please get in touch with me. I hope this will be a good week. I hope you'll be blessed this week, and I look forward to sharing with you.